Jackson Cole never expected anything unusual to happen on his shift, especially not at Outpost K9, a quiet and forgotten maintenance station orbiting the far edge of Sector 17. He was just a systems engineer, one of the few humans assigned to monitor and repair satellite arrays and outdated comm beacons, far from the buzz of galactic politics or alien wars. His routine was boring, and he liked it that way. Wake up, check the diagnostics, drink terrible station coffee, fix whatever needed fixing, then watch old Earth movies until sleep came. But on that cold day in the station's third cycle, everything changed when a massive starship, badly damaged and trailing sparks, dropped from hyperspace and crash-landed on the nearby asteroid field. Alarms blared as the outpost's AI tried to decode its failing distress signal, but Jackson, already sliding into his repair suit, didn't wait for full clearance. He launched his utility pod and sped toward the wreck, heart pounding as he dodged. Fragments of hull plating and shattered crystal thrusters. What kind of ship was this? Its design was elegant, unlike any military vessel he'd seen before, with sweeping silver lines and glowing floral emblems along its side. As he maneuvered closer, the emergency hatch hissed open, and from the smoke stepped figures wrapped in radiant armor, tall, graceful, and armed. At first, Jackson thought he was hallucinating from oxygen deprivation, but then she appeared. The woman at the center wore no helmet, her long dark hair floating around her like a cloud, her violet eyes glowing faintly, even in the dim emergency lights. She was more than beautiful. She was impossible, like a living painting, a goddess, made flesh. Her presence silenced everything, even the buzzing in his own mind. The guards stepped aside, forming a protective ring as she walked forward and looked straight at him. For a long moment she said nothing, just studied him with an expression both curious and calm, and Jackson, stunned, realized he was holding his breath. Then she spoke in perfect, clear English. "This man is my mate." Her voice echoed across the ship's comm channel, shocking not just Jackson, but her own people. The guards turned sharply, their faces showing confusion and alarm. Jackson blinked. Mate? Did she mean partner? Assistant? Or did she just propose marriage? Before he could ask, her guards moved in fast, surrounding him without hostility, but with undeniable purpose. One of them scanned his vitals, while another gently but firmly took his toolkit. "Wait," he said, raising his hands. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." But no one listened. Within minutes, he was escorted into the shining interior of the alien vessel, walls alive with shifting light, scentless air, and corridors that hummed like music. His questions were met with polite silence. Even when he tried to explain he was just a maintenance guy, they only replied, "You have been chosen by her radiance." Her radiance? Was that what they called her? He was seated in a luxurious chamber, given water, and left to wait. His mind raced. Was this a joke? A test? Was he dreaming? Hours passed before the door opened, and she entered again, this time alone. "I apologize for the abruptness," she said, her tone now softer, even warm, "but my instincts do not lie. You are the one." Jackson stared at her, speechless, trying to think of anything that made sense. "I don't know who you are," he said at last, "but I'm just a guy who fixes broken machines. I'm not special." She tilted her head slightly. "You are more than you know. Your mind is clear, your soul unbound." The bond chose you." He laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "Yeah, well, the bond might be broken." But she didn't laugh. She just stepped closer and said, "My name is Queen Seralina of Virelia Prime. I have seen the hearts of kings, warriors, and scholars. None of them ... None of them felt like this." Jackson's throat went dry. He had heard the name before. In passing news clips, Virelia Prime was one of the most powerful and advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Its queen known for diplomacy, strength, and unmatched beauty. But those were distant stories, not something that landed on his outpost doorstep. "This is a mistake," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "There are millions of better candidates." She nodded slowly. "Yes, millions, but I chose you." With that, she turned and left, leaving him alone in silence that felt too heavy for words. As her ship began repairs, and her crew made secretive preparations, Jackson paced in circles, trying to figure out what to do. Could he escape? Would Earth even help him if he sent a distress signal? But part of him wasn't even sure he wanted to run. He didn't trust the situation, but something in her gaze had felt real. Too real. And that's what frightened him. Most. Jackson Cole sat on the edge of the silver bench inside the Queen's ship, his thoughts spinning faster than the stars outside the viewport. He had been taken without a real choice, guided politely but firmly through the glowing halls of a vessel that felt more like a floating palace than a spaceship. He hadn't seen Queen Seralina again since their strange and unforgettable first conversation, but her words haunted him. "You are the one." He didn't know what that meant, and no one would explain. The guards, tall and calm, watched him without speaking unless necessary. The few servants he saw bowed to him, which made him even more nervous. Earth had no place in the grand halls of galactic power, and certainly no small-time engineer from Outpost K9 deserved to be spoken of as the mate of her radiance. As the ship repaired itself with living nanotech tiny silver lights crawling over broken panels, Jackson tried to understand what was happening. Each time he asked to go back to his outpost or send a message to Earth, he was told with the same calm answer, "You are under protection." But protection from what? He wasn't a threat to anyone. He didn't even own a weapon. As the stars outside shifted, and the hum of the ship changed tone, he realized they were moving fast. The Queen's cruiser had returned to hyperspace, and Jackson was no longer in orbit near his lonely outpost. He was being taken deep into the heart of Virelian space. When he finally entered the throne chamber, after hours of waiting, he understood why so many called Queen Seralina the most powerful monarch in the galaxy. The room was massive, with crystal pillars and a floating ceiling that reflected the stars above. Seralina stood at the center, dressed in robes that shimmered like liquid light. The guards knelt before her, but Jackson just stood, unsure what to do. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment the room felt completely silent. Then she walked toward him. "I know you are confused," she said gently, her voice carrying through the chamber without echo, "but I need you to trust me." Jackson didn't answer right away. He was afraid that this was too big, too strange, too fast. "Why me?" he finally asked. "I'm not a soldier. I'm not special. I'm not even important on my own planet." She looked at him for a long time, and then smiled. "That's exactly why. You are not seeking power, so you will not abuse it. You are not trained for lies, so you speak the truth. And you are not like the others who've tried to claim my hand." Jackson frowned. "So I'm your mate now?" The word felt heavy in his mouth. Saralina nodded once. "It is a sacred bond chosen by instinct and mind. I have resisted the call for years, but when I looked at you, I knew." Jackson shook his head, unsure whether to laugh or run. Before he could decide, a new voice entered the room, a tall man in royal armor, his expression stern. "Your Radiance, the Council demands an explanation. This cannot go unchallenged." Jackson learned the man's name was High Commander Dren, head of the Queen's personal guard and one of her most trusted advisors. He did not hide his dislike for Jackson. "You bring a human from a non-allied world and call him your mate? The Council will not accept this." Saralina faced him calmly. "Then the Council must learn to accept what destiny has chosen." Dren's jaw tightened, but he bowed and left without another word. Jackson watched him go, uneasy. "I'm causing problems, aren't I?" he asked. Saralina gave him a sad smile. "You are shaking an empire, Jackson Cole, but sometimes empires need to be shaken." As the ship approached Virelia Prime, Jackson saw the planet from the viewing deck, lush, blue-green, surrounded by protective rings and space stations, glowing like a jewel in the dark. A line of sleek escort ships met them mid-orbit, and the Queen's cruiser descended in perfect silence through silver clouds. When the ship landed, crowds were waiting. They stood in quiet lines along floating platforms, dressed in robes and armor, their eyes fixed on the Queen and her guest. Jackson walked beside her, dressed now in formal Virelian garb that itched slightly around the collar. He felt like a child among giants. People whispered, some bowed, others stared with cold eyes. He was not welcomed by all, that much was clear. Inside the palace, he was brought to a private chamber with smooth white walls and a ceiling that changed to show different skies. He wasn't a prisoner, but it didn't feel like freedom either. Guards stood at every door. Meals were served on golden trays, but no one spoke to him unless spoken to first. Late that night, a young servant slipped into the room with a message. Queen Saralina requested his presence on the upper balcony. There, under a sky filled with twin moons, she stood waiting, her hands resting on the cold stone rail. "This is where I come when I doubt," she said softly as he joined her. "The stars do not lie." Jackson looked up. "I've doubted everything since I got on that ship." She turned to him, eyes full of quiet fire. "Then let me show you why I believe in you." She tapped a control on her bracelet, and a projection came to life, images of alien races, star systems, political maps, and records of conflict. Virelia stood at the center of a growing storm. Rival empires wanted her throne. Factions within her council sought to divide her people. The bond of a royal mate was not just personal, it was political. A mate chosen by tradition gave her power, but a mate chosen from outside the system could challenge the old rules, reset the balance. Jackson didn't understand all of it, but he saw enough. Her choice wasn't just about love, it was a message. A risk, a war, maybe. And she had chosen him to stand at her side, not because he was strong or famous, but because he was the one person no one expected. That night he couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of the weight of something new responsibility. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He couldn't walk away now. Not from her. Not from the truth. And far above, the stars spun slowly, as if watching and waiting for what would come next. Jackson Cole stood in the grand chamber of the High Council, surrounded by towering figures dressed in royal robes, their eyes sharp and cold as glass, judging him without hiding it. The air was tense, filled with silent disapproval. He had expected resistance, but not this level of cold hatred. Queen Seralina stood beside him, calm but watchful, her presence steady as stone. The room shimmered with blue and gold lights, and at the center, an old counselor stepped forward and announced the decision. Jackson would face the trial of worth. It was a Varillian tradition, an ancient test given to those not born into this royal line but chosen by fate. If he passed, he would earn the right to stand at Seralina's side. If he failed, he would be sent back to Earth, and the Queen's choice would be declared invalid. Jackson's stomach dropped, but he didn't argue. He had seen enough to understand that nothing on this planet would be handed to him. That evening, he was taken to the trial grounds, a strange, circular arena floating above the city, built with shifting walls and gravity that bent in impossible ways. A trial master in silver armor greeted him and explained the rules. There were 3 stages: the mind, the body, and the heart. Each one tested a different kind of strength, and none of them could be passed with luck alone. Jackson nodded and prepared himself. The first trial began with silence. He was placed in a chamber with no doors and no walls, only floating symbols and sounds that moved around him like ghosts. The trial of the mind tested problem-solving, logic, and intuition. A voice echoed above him, asking riddles and showing puzzles that twisted through time and space. Jackson didn't have special training, but he was an engineer, used to fixing broken systems and thinking under pressure. He studied patterns, followed changes in light and sound, and slowly began to understand the rules. After what felt like hours, the voice fell silent, and the room opened. The trial master appeared and gave a short nod. He had passed. But there was no time to celebrate. The trial of the body began next. Jackson was dropped into a gravity field where his weight shifted every minute. 1 second he was floating. The next he could barely lift his arms. Robotic opponents with glowing eyes attacked from all sides, testing speed and strength. He had no weapons, only instinct. He ducked, rolled, dodged, and used his environment, walls, beams, even his own momentum. He wasn't a soldier, but he was clever. He made the robots crash into each other, led them into traps, and used his knowledge of balance and leverage. Bruised and breathless, he stood alone at the end, and the field went still. He had passed again. The crowd above, watching from the city's towers, began to murmur. Maybe the human was not so weak after all. But the final test was the hardest, the trial of the heart. He was taken to a quiet room with only a single chair and a screen. On it appeared images from Earth, his home, his past, and his people. Then came the questions. Would he give up his place beside Seralina if Earth needed him? Would he betray her to save his home? Would he choose love or duty? The screen showed him false choices created by the trial, but they felt real. He saw Seralina in danger. He saw Earth burning. He saw himself holding the power to save one, but not both. It tore at him. He wanted to shout that none of it was fair, but he remembered her words that the bond chose him because he was honest, because he wasn't seeking power. Slowly, painfully, he answered each question with care, thinking not as a hero, but as a man trying to do what was right. When the screen turned off, he was alone again. Then the trial master entered one final time, not smiling, but nodding with clear respect. Jackson had passed all 3 trials. The crowd watching from the floating balconies erupted in shocked voices. No outsider had ever completed the trial of worth. He was taken back to the throne hall, where Saralina waited. She looked at him with something more than pride, something deeper. The council was silent, defeated but bound by their own laws. They could not deny him now. But just as Jackson thought it was over, a voice rang out from the shadows. High Advisor. Vian, once a loyal figure at Saralina's side, stepped forward with a twisted smile. Let the people cheer, he said softly. Let them be fooled. But do not forget that bonds can be broken and empires can fall. Before anyone could react, he vanished into the crowd, his face the last thing Jackson saw before the doors closed. A new danger had been revealed, and though Jackson had passed the trials, the true test was still to come. The palace of Virelia Prime stood tall and shining against the twin moons, its crystal towers glowing like stars, but inside its walls, shadows had begun to move quietly, unseen and dangerous, as Jackson Cole tried to adjust to his strange new life among royalty and warriors. He had passed the trial of worth, earning the respect of many and the approval of the people, but behind there, smiles and bows, not everyone had accepted him. Whispers filled the halls like cold wind. Some said he was an outsider unfit for the queen. Others claimed his success in the trials was a trick, and a few feared that his bond with Queen Saralina would change too much, too fast. Jackson could feel the tension every time he walked through the palace, could sense eyes following him, and though Saralina remained calm in public, he noticed how her guards doubled at night, and how meetings ended with hushed arguments behind closed doors. One name returned again and again in the rumors: High Advisor Vianron, the same man who had spoken dark words after the trial and vanished into the crowd like smoke. Vian had once been a trusted voice in the Queen's circle, wise and clever, but something had changed in him over the last year, and now those who knew him best had started to worry. Jackson asked Saralina about him, but she only said Vian had grown cold and distant after the death of his family during a failed peace mission, grief that twisted into bitterness, ambition, and perhaps betrayal. Still, she refused to act against him without proof. Days passed, and Jackson began to feel trapped in a golden cage. He wore fine robes, sat beside Saralina during council meetings, and nodded politely, while advisors debated trade routes and border patrols. But he missed the quiet of space, the hum of machinery, the feeling of doing something real. That changed. One evening, when a young servant slipped into his room, her face pale with fear, she handed him a small silver chip and whispered, "They're meeting tonight. In the lower archives, I heard them say your name." Before Jackson could ask more, she fled. He took the chip to his private scanner and watched as grainy images loaded, a group of men and women in dark robes, standing in a circle, speaking in a coded dialect. But one face was clear. Franz Jackson didn't understand every word, but the meaning was clear. They planned to remove Seralina from the throne, using him as the reason. The human is the key, Viren had said. She broke tradition for him. That makes her weak. We strike at dawn. Jackson's hands trembled as he backed away from the screen. He ran to Seralina's chambers, but she was already gone attending a late council session in the Tower of Light. The palace felt too quiet as he rushed through the halls, his footsteps echoing like warnings. He didn't see the shadow behind him until it was too late. A hand grabbed his shoulder, and another struck him hard across the temple. The world spun. He collapsed. When he woke, he was locked in a cold room beneath the palace, hands bound, a wound throbbing at the side of his head. Across from him stood Viren, calm and smiling like a man who believed he had already won. "You should have stayed on your little outpost," Viren said. "This world is not for men like you." Jackson tried to stand, but pain held him down. "You're betraying her," he said through gritted teeth. Bren's smile faded. "She betrayed us first. The old ways kept Virelia strong. Then she chose you a stranger, a nobody. The people may cheer now, but they'll thank me when she's gone." Before Jackson could reply, Viren turned and left, locking the heavy door behind him. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes before the door opened again. This time it was not a guard, but the same young servant girl, pale and shaking, who had warned him earlier. "I had to pretend I was bringing food," she whispered as she cut the ropes around his wrists. "You have to stop them. They're gathering weapons in the West Wing." Jackson, dizzy but determined, nodded and followed her through narrow tunnels and servant passages that twisted under the palace like forgotten veins. They emerged behind the Tower of Light just as dawn's first light touched the city. Above them, Seralina's voice rang out from a balcony, addressing the council. Jackson saw the rebels moving in the shadows dressed as guards, hiding plasma blades beneath their cloaks. "There," the girl pointed, and Jackson didn't hesitate. He ran. He shouted Seralina's name just as the first attacker raised his weapon. Everything happened at once. Guards turned, people screamed, and Seralina spun to see Jackson throw himself at the attacker, knocking him off balance. The blade sliced Jackson's arm, but he didn't stop. Real guards joined the fight, surrounding the traitors, who fought back with silent fury. Chaos exploded in the tower as Viren stepped into view, raising a blaster and aiming straight at the Queen. Jackson, bleeding and breathless, lunged again, knocking the shot off course. The beam struck a pillar, shattering it in a blast of dust and fire. Seralina's guards tackled Viren, pinning him down as more traitors were captured. When it was over, the courtyard was littered with weapons and broken stone. The sky above filled with the sounds of patrol ships descending to secure the area. Jackson stood unsteadily, his arm burning, his vision blurred. Seralina rushed to him, catching him before he could fall. "You knew," she whispered, eyes wide. "You stopped them." He nodded weakly. "I couldn't let them hurt you." As medics took him away, he looked back one last time and saw Viren being dragged in chains, no longer calm, no longer powerful, just a man whose hate had consumed everything. But even as peace returned to the palace, Jackson knew this was only the beginning. Enemies could be defeated, but fear was harder to kill. And now all eyes were on the human who had dared to stand between a queen and a traitor. News of the betrayal spread across the stars like wildfire, and while Queen Saralina's people praised Jackson for saving her life, others, nobles, merchants, even planetary leaders, grew nervous, unsure what the future held now that a human stood so close to the throne of the most powerful world in the galaxy. Whispers of rebellion grew louder, and distant systems began to question Virelia's leadership, claiming the bond between Saralina and Jackson had made her blind to tradition. But even as the Queen worked to restore order at home, something unexpected happened. Earth responded. Jackson's disappearance had not gone unnoticed back on his homeworld. When the Virelians first arrived, Earth's leaders had tried to remain quiet, too unsure and too cautious, afraid of angering a race far more advanced. But now, with reports of political unrest, rebellion, and assassination attempts tied to a human name, Earth's leaders decided it was time to act. First came the diplomatic fleet, a small group of sleek, high-tech ships equipped with experimental warp drives and long-range scanners, sent not to fight but to investigate. They arrived in Virelian space without warning, flashing Earth's new alliance code and demanding answers. Saralina allowed them entry, but the visit was tense. The diplomats, though polite, made it clear they had full backing from Earth's Defense Council, and they weren't just here for Jackson, they were here to make sure humanity was treated with respect. Behind them followed whispers of a second fleet, a military one, hidden somewhere in deep space, waiting for orders. Jackson was caught in the middle, once again. While healing from his injuries, he met the Earth diplomats, men and women in sharp black uniforms who barely recognized him anymore. "You're a legend now," one of them said with a half-smile. "Earth wants to know if you're a hostage or a king." Jackson didn't know what to say. He wasn't either. He was just a man who'd followed the truth and happened to fall in love. But Earth's pressure had done something unexpected. It made the Virelian people pause. They had always seen humans as lesser, slower, weaker, but now Earth stood tall, not just as an emerging power, but one willing to defend its own. And as Vran's trial began with shocking testimony, secret files, and captured traitors telling their part, some in the High Council began to wonder if they had judged the humans too quickly. Still, the balance was fragile. One spark could shatter it all. That spark came in the form of a mysterious signal from the outer rim. A Virelian deep space colony had gone silent. When scouts were sent to investigate, they found the station destroyed, its surface scorched, and no survivors. A strange symbol was burned into the station's remains, a circle with 3 lines cutting through it. It was not Virelian. It was not human. And it was not known to any records in the galactic database. Earth and Virelia both saw the same threat at once. Someone else was watching, waiting, and now acting. In an emergency council session, Earth's top commander appeared via Hola and spoke directly to Saralina and her advisors. "This is no longer just about politics," she said. "If this enemy attacks again, neither of our worlds will survive alone." Jackson, now recovered and back at Saralina's side, stood and added quietly, "Maybe this is why we were brought together. Not to rule, but to fight what's coming." And so, for the first time in galactic history, a joint fleet was formed. Earth's best pilots, Virelian warriors, and even a few daring allies from neutral systems. Jackson joined them, not as a leader but as a bridge between the two worlds. They followed the signal trail, using advanced tracking tech to trace the strange energy back to a distant moon hidden behind a cluster of dying stars. What they found shook them all, a vast machine buried beneath the moon's surface, still active, still transmitting. It wasn't made by humans or Virilians. Its architecture bent physics, and its power core was older than any known star. The device was scanning the galaxy, cataloging life, and erasing what it judged unfit. The destroyed colony had failed its test. Jackson stood in the control chamber with Saralina beside him and realized what they were truly facing: an ancient AI race long dormant, now reawakening to carry out a mission written thousands of years ago. They weren't fighting rebels or politicians anymore. They were facing extinction. Back in Virilian space, the news caused panic. Old enemies offered truces. Earth, once cautious, began to send more ships, more mines, and even open up old black site labs to develop weapons capable of defending against something they barely understood. Saralina called for unity across the stars, warning that only together could they survive. And in the center of it all, Jackson, still just a man from a quiet outpost, now found himself the one person both sides trusted, the only voice that humans and Virilians would follow without question. But deep inside, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. This enemy wasn't just powerful, it was silent, cold, and precise. And somewhere out there, more machines like the one on the moon were waking up. As the fleet prepared for war, and Earth and Virilia stood side by side for the first time in history, Jackson walked onto the bridge of the joint flagship, looked out into the endless black, and whispered to himself, "Humanity strikes back, but we're not ready for what's coming." The joint fleet moved like a river of fire through the dark, led by Earth's fastest cruisers and Virilia's shining warships, all bound for a battle none of them fully understood, while Jackson Cole stood near the front, no longer just an outsider or guest, but a man carrying the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. And beside him stood Queen Saralina, calm but watchful, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead, where the real enemy waited. The ancient machines had awakened across several systems now, striking fast and without warning, leaving nothing behind but silence and strange symbols etched into the ground or scorched into stone. Every fleet sent to stop them had failed, not because of weak weapons or poor planning, but because the machines were always one step ahead, adapting, learning, and disappearing before anyone could catch them. It was Saralina who realized the truth first, that the machines weren't just trying to destroy life, but to test it, to measure the strength, unity, and resolve of civilizations. And if a species could not work together, could not overcome fear and ego, it was erased like a failed experiment. That idea shook everyone, because it meant this was not just a war of ships and weapons, but of hearts and loyalty. Jackson called it the final trial, and even the name gave people chills. The moon base from before had been only a scout, and deeper scans found a much larger structure hidden beyond the galactic edge, something ancient, almost like a throne world for the machines, surrounded by shifting fields of dark energy and cloaked in technology that even Virilia's best minds couldn't understand. The joint fleet made its way there with caution, but time was running out. Colonies were vanishing. Signals were falling silent. Earth sent its best engineers to help decode the enemy code, while Virelia offered elite combat teams trained for zero-gravity boarding operations. Jackson, still haunted by the images of destroyed outposts, chose to lead the first strike himself, and Saralina, despite protests from her council, refused to let him go alone. When they reached the machine world, it looked like a nightmare, a vast metal sphere, the size of a planet, pulsing with red and blue lights, orbiting a dead star with giant mechanical arms that reached into space like frozen claws. The fleet circled it carefully, trying to find a way inside. Then the machine spoke not with words, but through every ship's system at once, flooding screens with symbols and patterns, almost like a question being asked. The message repeated over and over, growing louder, more urgent, and Jackson realized they had to answer, not with a weapon, but with proof that they had changed. So he broadcasted a signal of his own, not from a general or a leader, but from a man who had once been no one, who had been chosen by a queen, trusted by two great peoples, and had fought not to conquer, but to protect something rare. "We are not perfect," he said, his voice steady as the signal went out, "but we stand together now, not just humans, not just Virelians. We are more, and we are ready." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the surface of the machine world opened, like a great eye blinking awake, and the fleet moved in. Inside they found no soldiers, no guns, only light, data, and giant machines watching silently. It was a test, just as Saralina had said, and Jackson's answer had passed. The machine world powered down, going dormant as if it had finally found what it had been looking for. The war was over before it began, not with explosions, but with understanding. Across the galaxy, systems held their breath, then cheered, and Earth and Virelia declared a new era. No more cold borders or secret doubts. They would build a future side by side. In the weeks that followed, old rivalries faded as new plans were made. Jackson became more than a hero. He became a symbol of unity, and Saralina, once seen as reckless for choosing a human, was now hailed as the wisest queen in Virelian history. But even as celebrations echoed from planet to planet, a quiet question remained. What comes next? The answer came in the form of a new throne, not just for one queen or one world, but a shared seat of power placed aboard a vast station built between Earth and Virelia, a floating capital called Unity's Heart. It would host both governments, both cultures, and be defended by both fleets. And Jackson, once a repairman on a lonely outpost, was offered a place beside Saralina, not just as her mate, but as the first ambassador of the new alliance. He accepted, though he still felt strange wearing medals and giving speeches, preferring quiet talks with engineers and young cadets who looked at him like he was something more than just lucky. On the day the station was activated, Saralina took his hand and led him to the central chamber, where leaders from dozens of worlds waited. She turned to the galaxy and said, "This man, this human, was once a stranger among us. Now he is family. And together we will face whatever comes next." The crowd roared. Somewhere in the stars the silent machines listened. And far from any sun, a new signal began to blink, different, distant, but watching. Jackson didn't know if peace would last forever. But for now a new throne had been built, not from stone or steel, but from trust. And it was only the beginning.